Good afternoon and welcome to today's international webinar where we will be commemorating International Women's Day 2021. Today's event is being run in collaboration between the Education and Culture Ministry through the Center for Character Building or Puspeka and Publicis Communications Singapore. The theme of today's event is the Power of Unreasonable Women. Today's speaker will be the Minister for Education and Culture, Nadiem Makarim, and the host of today's event will be the CEO of Publicis Communications Singapore, DeLa Pena. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now outline some basic procedure of the event for today's program. Number 1. The webinar will commence at 1 p.m. Western Indonesia time or 2 p.m. in Singapore time. Number 2. Participants can listen to the event in either English or Bahasa Indonesia. Number 3. To access the interpretation feature during today's event, please follow the video tutorial that will be shown and the information that will be displayed throughout the event. Number 4. Participants can ask questions via the Q&A feature in either Bahasa Indonesia or English. Number 5. To be able to identify you, please write down your full name when asking a question. Number 6. Participants that ask questions anonymously will not be able to have their questions selected or presented to the speakers.
Selamat datang Bapak Ibu yang terhormat. Kami akan menjelaskan cara menggunakan penjuru bahasaan dalam aplikasi Zoom. Jika Anda ingin mendengarkan dalam bahasa Indonesia, silahkan menekan ikon bola dunia yang terletak di bawah layar Zoom Anda. Lalu pilih Indonesian. Jika ingin mendengarkan dalam bahasa Inggris, silahkan pilih English. Jika Anda tidak menemukan channel Indonesian di layar Anda, mohon untuk keluar dan mengupdate versi terbaru, kemudian bergabung kembali ke meeting. Jika Anda mengakses acara ini dari web browser, Anda tidak akan menemukan fitur penjuru bahasaan, harap mengunduh aplikasi Zoom, lalu leave meeting dan join kembali melalui aplikasi. Proses ini tidak akan memerlukan waktu yang lama. Ketika Anda sedang berbicara atau bertanya, Anda harus memilih channel yang sesuai dengan bahasa yang Anda ucapkan. Jika tidak, suara Anda akan bertabrakan dengan suara juru bahasa kami. Jika Anda akan berbicara dalam bahasa Indonesia, pastikan bahwa Anda di channel Indonesian. Dan jika Anda akan berbicara dalam bahasa Inggris, pastikan bahwa Anda berada di channel English. Jika Anda mengakses Zoom melalui ponsel, klik tombol More yang berada di kanan bawah, lalu klik Language Interpretation, kemudian pilih Indonesian atau English, lalu klik Done. Demi kelancaran acara, mohon menonaktifkan mikrofon saat Anda tidak berbicara. Terima kasih, semoga acara ini berjalan dengan lancar.
Bapak dan Ibu hadirin sekalian, terima kasih telah bergabung dan kita akan segera memulai acara hari ini. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We will immediately get underway with today's program.
Hello, Nadiem, Mas Nadiem. Good afternoon.
Hi, Lou. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Happy International Women's Day to your cohorts, your constituents, your wife, Franca, who's listening in, and to the future women of your life, your 3 daughters who are too young to listen in.
Yes. Happy Women's Day to you too.
So I'm going to get straight to it. If people are wondering why we are ending our 4-part series called The Power of Unreasonable Women with a Man, I just want to explain to everyone that, first of all, you are, I believe, a feminist at heart. You married one, and I'm sure you'd want to raise 3 women who are also going to be feminists. And by feminists, I mean all about shortening the gap or even meeting the gap of gender equality. That's the first reason. The second reason is, I know you will agree with me that we need more and more women participating, whether it's decision-making or in places where they can take care of the next generation. But the more important reason why I've thought of you is because to close that gap in equality starts with education. And you are unreasonable yourself in your ambition, as we all know. And that's what the next hour and 10 minutes now that I have, because our time has been shortened, is really the role that education will play in shortening this gap or meeting this gap of gender equality. Sounds good?
Can I first ask you a question, Lou? Why did you call this seminar The Power of Unreasonable Women? I really like the title. Can you explain why you chose Unreasonable Women?
Sure. As an unreasonable woman myself, I think, you know, I'm 46, right? The generation before me and before the generation before me, my mother, my older sisters, and so on, and even up to today, when women talk about their ambition, it is often seen as a dirty word, a negative word, an aggressive word, and that, you know, we bore the silence that our mothers and their mothers, we followed that silence where we're not comfortable talking about being ambitious or following, you know, a big desire or a sense of achievement. And in fact, even up until today's world, it is still unreasonable for women to be in positions where they can decide, where they can lead, where they can make a difference, and where they can raise the next generation. In fact, it will take 160 years to close this gap in Asia Pacific alone, according to the World Economic Forum 2020 Gender Gap Report. So I wanted to celebrate the fact that I think we need to talk about this, because we can't have an equalized world or a better world or a richer world if we do not encourage our girls to be a little bit more unreasonable.
I love the title of the seminar, and I do that because I'm actually a fan of unreasonable women. I think they tend to change the world. I certainly hope that my daughters will become, to a certain extent, unreasonable women. And the irony about that statement is that the word unreasonable just comes from the male-centric view of women that want to go beyond their traditional boundaries and want to dream big. And I think, you know, I'm sure you've experienced this too, but I've experienced this in my work environment, that very often, you know, the most capable women in an organization is often labeled by, to be honest, men to be quite unreasonable and quite pushy, and terms that would never be applied to men who are even more aggressive, but then they're just considered very strong leaders. So just that difference of terminology of strong leaders versus, you know, kind of unreasonable or pushy women leaders just indicates what exactly is wrong with the kind of the cultural paradigm of both the professional world and bureaucracies, I think, all around the world, which is changing, but I think it needs to be changing faster. So I think it's a very perfect depiction and choice of title that you had.
Yeah, it's a theme. So I'm going to go straight into that, because based on what you just said, which is women are often walking a tightrope. You know, we can't be too aggressive. We can't be too nice. We can't be a doormat. We can't be too silent. We can't be too loud. We have to be feminine, but we have to be assertive. We have to be clear. And yet sometimes we're punished for being open about our desires. And you know what that does to girls, and I've been mentoring for 25 years, which gives away my age, is that the inherent lack of confidence in women, in young girls. And so my first question to you really is, as a Minister of Education, how would you institutionalize confidence in the curriculum? How would you shape the syllabus or what we are teaching so that young women can learn to be confident and assertive at such a young age? Because I find this is severely lacking all the way up to, you know, people older than me.
Yeah. The normal reaction, Lou, to a question posed by all ministers of education is, what are you going to do about the curriculum? Right? That's kind of your standard response. But I can assure you the curriculum is only one element of what education transformation is about. Arguably, there are elements that are even more important, like the development of the mentors themselves within the educational institutions, which are called teachers and principals. We have this, what's really ironic about the situation is that for a lot of educational institutions, the majority of teachers are women. And having strong, innovative, and daring women as role models, as teachers, is probably the most effective way of increasing the confidence level of the girls that are learning in the classrooms. So don't forget that it's not just because we enforce some kind of a textbook on gender equality and then suddenly the job is done. No, in fact, that would be probably one of the least effective ways. The most effective ways that we change as a culture in the education system is through role modeling. So I'll give you an example. If we want to create, how do you expect to create innovative children if the teachers themselves are not innovative, right? Lou, in your organization, how do you expect to have creative thinkers, open out-of-the-box thinkers, when their leaders are not encouraging and also thinking in an open-the-box way or are open to it? It's practically impossible. Now, the corporate world behaves exactly the same in the same dynamic as schools. If you look at it from a cultural unit, it's the same thing. It's all about role modeling. It's all about actually the adults in the room showing what the limits of the imagination for women can be. So I think one of the most effective ways is to get the women leaders in the school, the women teachers in the school, to showcase their independent thinking, to showcase their confidence, to showcase their unlimited imagination on what the girls and what they themselves can achieve. And that's going to bring the permanent kind of cultural shift in the education system, not just the textbook or a revision of the curriculum. I think that's you're far more effective doing that when you're trying to increase numeracy and literacy numbers, right? Then those are curriculum initiatives. But you need real leadership transformation within the school environment, seeing how a female principal operates and has the confidence to talk to the male teachers in the school, even when it's an uncomfortable conversation. Watching their teachers talk to their parents in a way that instills confidence to the girls, listening in and watching their grown-ups do that. Of course, this applies not only for teachers, but to the parents itself. But I think that's one of the biggest things you can. I have a few other things but did you want to comment on that first? Because there's a few other initiatives that I think precede curriculum change.
No, I read up on that. So if we could just pause on that for a second. I love the fact that you believe in coaching and mentoring as a teacher, and that it's actually a style of teaching, that it's not just about curriculum-based or knowledge transfer. Just building on that before we go into your other programs, you were also quoted as personalization at scale, applying it to education. And this I love, and you would know why I would love this, because this is the world I belong to. It's really taking the approach that, technology companies and even media companies and communication companies use and applying it to learning. So the idea that you're segmenting audiences, in this case, students, vis-a-vis their passions and interests, as opposed to a unidirectional approach to learning. What have you observed so far as a Minister of Education that is unique to young girls and their learning capacity, ability, and the pursuits that you're seeing should be encouraged among these young girls versus guys? Maybe you can break it down between high school and grade school, because I find that growing up, I was stereotyped to learning how to knit, to learning how to cook, to learning how to sew, but I wasn't interested in that. What if I wanted to do more sports, which builds your character as a young leader?
Yeah. So as far as I've seen,
yeah,
I do not see too many discernible differences in interest as well as capability, right, between boys and girls. What is shockingly evident, though, is that the societal expectations upon boys and girls, societal includes parents, teachers, and social environments, very often tend to shape or contain that potential in very, very subtle and not so subtle ways, Lou. So, I think that if we really opened up the freedom for girls to choose in terms of, let's say subjects, I think you will find a far more equal distribution than you would think. I think it's very, very dangerous to assume and kind of box in girls and boys to what kind of, especially as they get older, to what kind of interests that gender tends to prefer. Yes, we definitely see rifts and splits, like say in sciences and maths globally on a scale. But I think that has more to do not with the intrinsic capability or interests of boys versus girls. It has much more to do with the expectation of success, right? Advice of adults around them, all kind of influencing this weird kind of specialization. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that boys and girls are the same. This is not what I'm arguing. I've been trying to get my daughters to play with trucks and love blue colors. But no, they love stories about princesses. I cannot, for the life of me, change that. Okay, I've given up now. I've given up. I've tried to get them there. But you know what? They love Lego as much as boys do. Right?
Yeah.
Now, so there are definitely differences, and we have to stop seeing these differences as if somehow they are qualitatively better or worse. There are definitely differences between the genders, but they have an equal opportunity of success in any given field. That I fervently believe, right? So if we look at it from a system-wide perspective, though there are certain things that I've seen, at least because I have 3 daughters, Lou, I can see certain elements of how, and I see them interacting with other kids in their playgroup, etc., that there's definitely some differences. And I would see that there are some early skills and advantages that girls have. Definitely for sure, in terms of, learning to read and write and speaking. Very often at a very young age, girls have an advantage here.
Yes.
They definitely have an advantage. And that's an advantage that they should be allowed to excel further and not have to hold themselves back, right?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we are pushing in this new kind of paradigm of emancipated learning, we call it Merdeka Belajar, or emancipated learning, is this concept of teaching at the right level. It's this concept that the curriculum is there as a continuum, as a spectrum that teachers are free to use depending on the different level of competencies of their kids. So if they want to split their classroom into different levels, they can do that. If they want to use an online test using technology and start segmenting their class based on level of competencies and give them segmented or personalized homework, they should do that, right? The point here is that standardization is really the least optimal way of getting everyone to learn because everyone learns at their own pace. This is the fundamental truth about learning and child psychology, right? So this paradigm shift of giving the freedom to teachers to actually say, you know what, my class is it's 1 year behind on this kind of field based on these diagnostics. I should have the right to move back and try to catch up. Or maybe a certain group of my class is a little bit behind on this subject, but another group is advanced in another subject. And I would like to customize and segmentize. So this is the link, Lou, between what you mentioned about personalization and segmentation, and also helping, for example, girls be able to advance in areas and succeed in areas, and they don't get held back because they just have certain differences at an earlier age, right? So it plays into the gender question, though this is beneficial for boys and for girls, right? For boys and for girls. And I think one last point of this is that it's not just the segmentizing and personalization. You've also got to start to introduce choice. And the choices that happen as they get older should not dictate their opportunities, should not limit and contain their opportunities. So one of the things that we are heavily considering is how do we create equality between subjects, and how then universities can perceive achievements in a variety of fields, including the arts, including music, including other vocational fields, that may level the playing field, not just between girls and boys. They may level the playing field between kids from a more privileged background and a less privileged background. They may also level the opportunities between kids that live in cities versus kids that are in the rural areas. And so thinking of education as giving the maximum possibilities of success in order to close these gaps is, I think, one of the most important trends in education today. You got to give them chances to succeed in so many different ways, because children are successful in very, very unique ways, and all children can succeed in unique ways. And girls are no different in that respect.
You know, the ability to give choice to children, I mean, obviously guided by the parents, given what they're inclined to be interested in or even good at, is extremely disruptive in and of itself. What I'm really curious about with, is it Merdeka Belajar? That's how you call it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is this idea that you're including creativity, mutual cooperation, global diversity, critical reasoning, and independence as part of the values or as part of the curriculum in, you know, raising the children of Indonesia. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? I mean, I could venture, I guess, why? Sure. Because I understand your point of view and what the world needs, but I think everyone needs to hear about this.
Yeah, it's just, it seems to me, you know, I've been very frustrated at the fact that a lot of people and leaders around the world, when they talk about education, they always talk about these big goals and big words on creativity, innovation, etc. But then, you know, when you look at what's happening on the ground, the kids are not being assessed on their creativity, on their innovation, on their ability to independently motivate themselves. The teachers are not being assessed on that. They're being assessed on how much, you know, how many formulas they can memorize in mathematics, or how many dates can they remember in history, or how many references they can memorize, and so on. So the focus on information was something that we had to, in the beginning of our education reform, make it very clear. What is the objective of education? What are the most important competencies that these kids will need in order to survive? And that is not the memorization of information. Mm-hmm. Okay, it is, and we've identified this as 6 kind of profiles, and I'll translate them loosely for you, Lou, into English.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So these 6 profiles, the first is spirituality and ethics and morality. Okay. The second, this is about actually understanding what is right and what is wrong, and understanding all the gray shades in the middle, and being able to be critically thinking about those shades in the middle. It's very easy to know what's right and what's wrong. You know, you cannot kill someone, you cannot steal, but understanding all the gray gradations there needs to be the focus of that component of understanding the ethics behind it, and why something is wrong. Why is taking a kickback when you're in a government job illegal and wrong? Why is it wrong to comment on someone's physical appearance, even though the whole class is laughing about it, right? Understanding the morality, the moral notions of religion and the essence of morality within religious teachings. I think that's where this component is all about. The next component is about diversity and global diversity, basically, and understanding that what makes us incredible as a human species is our diversity of opinions, ethnicities, religions, and the appreciation and love of that diversity beyond just tolerance for difference, but to love difference and have a sense of unity among the country, but also as global human citizens, right? How are we going to tackle climate change without a common sense of humanity among the world? It's simply impossible. That's just one example of why we called it global diversity. Then you've got, going into the harder skills. Now, people call this soft skills. I call it hard skills because I think these are the most important things, and they can absolutely be taught and learned. How to work in teams. Lou, I think you will agree with me on this.
Yes.
This is a hard skill. I don't know why people keep calling it a soft skill. This is bread and butter, how to operate in teams. How do you start a meeting? How do you set objectives? How do you convince someone to do the work that they have to do who is your peer? How do you get information and problem solve as a group so that it's not just a cacophony of voices? This is about, and this is where project-based learning is one of the only ways of actually teaching this, right? You've actually got to do stuff in a group with your peers and produce stuff. Yeah. So teamwork, and we call it collaboration and teamwork, is the third. And then we have creativity. And creativity is a combination of being able to think of novel solutions to existing problems, but to also adapt to new problems, and also the ability to expand your imagination where it's necessary. Then you've got, after creativity and innovation, you've got independence. Okay, you've got independence. That's the rough translation. It basically means having an internal compass to intrinsic motivation. It means that you have a growth mindset and that you are consistently motivated to learn for the rest of your life. You got to love the idea of upgrading yourself and seeing everything as a learning experience. Such an important part. It's probably how you hire the best team members, Lou, during recruitment, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with our kids. And then you've got critical thinking / problem solving, right? It's kind of interlapping, these two things. But critical thinking and problem solving is just basically, deductive logic. Some are quantitative, some are qualitative, but it's the ability to break down bigger problems into smaller problems. And it's the ability to critically think about problems and information instead of just absorbing everything, to kind of pause and create that filter to critically assess. So these are, Lou, the kind of 6 skills that we are trying to build. They sound very similar to 21st century skills. That's because they are, and they're aligned with the 21st century skills that a lot of educational institutions in the world have done. And if these are the goals, you use the curriculum and the subjects in order to strengthen. Those are the units of inquiry that you use to strengthen these core competencies.
Yeah, no, I think whether you have a child that's in school or you have a child on the way, or you don't, I think these are the things that can actually apply to a lot of adults and a lot of people listening in. And just building on that, it is no longer unreasonable to say that education is now a parent's primary responsibility. You were quoted as saying this with a work from home situation, which may or may not stay, and will probably stay even when things get a little bit back to the way it was. And that means that schools, whether it's the 6 pillars or 5 or 4 or 3, really nearly augment the education and not the other way around. And parents learned that, I think, the hard way in the last year and a bit. So what would you say would be the unreasonable shifts in behavior for parents to adopt this approach where they're actually going to have a bigger responsibility in educating their kids or monitoring their kids, apart from using technology? What other trends for parents and working moms, single moms, working dads, single dads, do you see that they need to embrace And as a follow-up question to that, you were also quoted as saying not to outsource learning. So, and I think these two questions are related. How has the role of the parents changed at home so that it's not completely outsourced to the school and their secondary? It's actually the other way around. And how do parents and children and even employees listening in, how do they ensure they're not outsourcing their learning?
Yeah. So I think we've seen this massive shift in realization that, oh, you know, I'm in charge of my child's education. And it took COVID, I think, to convince a lot of parents that this is actually the case, that it's ultimately the parents' final responsibility. And I think the first thing that requires is, again, this is all about mindset shifts, right? These are, I always go back to mindset shifts because that's the core. The only way we are going to get sustainable change in children's education is if enough adults change how they think about education. So the first shift is to first understand this. I always like to tell parents this. You all love the dream of personalized education, right? Technology is never going to get there. I'll tell you that right now. In fact, COVID has proven, and I'm coming from a technology background, okay? I won't say never, but for the foreseeable future, which is what matters for all of us here today, for the foreseeable future, there is no way that you are going to be able to achieve perfect personalized education with technology because you simply cannot scale the physical human, okay? Which every child needs. It's just science, you know. If education can be solved using an app and YouTube, our problems would be solved. Yeah, our problems would be solved. That would have been the immediate approach, right? If that were true, then we just go, let's build these amazing digital. No, that's not true. That's not how kids learn because of the socio-emotional prerequisite to learning, which is sense of emotional safety, right? Sense of trust, and sense of respect, which is very hard to achieve with a machine. It's simply impossible right now, unless there's some amazing machines that can completely replicate a great teacher, which it doesn't seem anytime soon to be possible. So why do I say that? Because then I go to parents and I say, then what is the closest way to achieve personalized education for your children? And the only answer that comes back is it cannot be the teacher because the teacher has to teach 20, 30 students, right? They can segment, they can use technology, they can get pretty good ways ahead there, but not personalized. The only personalized teacher in a child's life are their parents. Okay, let me say that one more time. The only fully personalized teacher to their children are parents, unless you can afford tutors. Okay, sure. Okay, for people that can afford, those are also personalized learning. But parent, you can't beat a parent. A parent is there all the time with a child, all the time. I'm not advocating for parents to start learning textbooks and start teaching your kids all the content of what is in school. What I am advocating for is that parents need to view education from a much more holistic perspective and to understand that education of their children involves key aspects of interaction. You need to talk to your kids. That is education. You want to teach a kid critical thinking? You ask them questions that do not have a correct answer. You want to teach a kid literacy. You want to teach a kid how to read. Then you have to start with language and take every opportunity to speak to your toddlers whenever you can. If you want to teach children mathematics, etc., provide ample opportunities and discussions in your house to talk about numbers and how they relate to their everyday context and lives, right? And this is my point is that, you know, even if you're not doing the curriculum and syllabus, like a lot of parents are now struggling with at school, once kids go back to school, you know, the real education of character building, of emotional awareness, making the kid realize what they're going through when they're sad and happy and angry and not negating it. That is an education. That is core skills for survival in the future. Getting a kid interested in their subjects, right? And showing exciting things about what they're learning so that they discover, finding their passions. That is education. And that's kind of like, and Lou, going back to the whole gender point here, is once you realize that and you want to get on it, you realize that this is simply impossible for most normal kind of two-parent households, right? Where you've got two individuals, right? Caring for the child. It's simply impossible to let one side only handle this.
Yes.
Can you imagine, like you've already burdened, and it's this falls disproportionately heavy to always the woman in the relationship in a traditional family, right? In a traditional family. The woman is, or the wife and the mother is already taking care of most of the mental mind share of organizing the logistics of the house. Usually they are 100% handling any logistic issues with the school, right? And then on top of that, they have to think about, you know, being the primary educator of their kid. So my message is simple here. For personalized education to happen at home and to really unleash the potential of your kids, the biggest shift has got to happen from daddies, right? The biggest shift has got to happen from daddies coming in and reimagining what it means to be an educator and to be a father to their children. And understanding that in today's world, those trade-offs are trade-offs. And you know, if you are a father that wants to commit all of your time to work and career and offload everything to the wife, that's fine. That's your decision, but own it. That's a choice. What I hate is the lack of accountability for a lot of men, especially in careers, that always claim, wait, but I'm the breadwinner, I'm the earner. I have to put in all of these crazy hours to continue in my career, etc. And I say to that, you know, I sometimes call BS on that. And I say, like, actually, it's everything is a choice. And
Nadiem, just some reaction to that. You know, your generation probably less so, but my generation definitely, and before me, we are subject to the patriarchy, even if that's largely written about in a Western context or through a Western lens. And I'm going to ask you something a little bit controversial, but do you agree with me that it's still very much alive in our region today, not just country specific? And that includes stereotyping the role of women and mothers, and therefore fathers maybe sometimes, you know, abdicating that role of outsourced learning when actually it should be a joint role.
Well, I don't think there's anything controversial about it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be gender initiatives in my ministry, gender empowerment, gender equality initiatives, right? Of course, it's a massive problem. We do live in a patriarchal society in this, especially in this region, and that needs to change. You know, that needs to change. And I am a huge believer that it's the guys. It's the guys, the young guys that need to drive a huge amount of this change. You can't just let all the women, the unreasonable women drive this change. The guys need to get on this and jump on this. And it's always when the dominant part of that patriarchal society decides to move forward and create that change and support that change that things really gather speed, right? And so for me, yes, absolutely. I don't think there's anything controversial about it. Absolutely. Until women.
In fact, as a measurement of, and I'm going to talk about success next because you talked about it, there is a global debate on the measurement to success, whether it's for men and for women. So my first is a comment. The second is a question. In fact, perhaps for the patriarchy to be less and less prevalent, a measure of success for men should be how much they support their women and how much they carry and share the load and how much they also, you know, choose to do that kind of learning and teaching to their kids. And on that note, because you're nodding and you're agreeing, as a minister of education versus as an ex-founder of and CEO of a tech unicorn, versus as a father of 3 young girls, how would you measure success for women everywhere?
how would I measure success
for women everywhere today? Yeah.
That's a very difficult question, Lou.
Yeah.
With a lot of traps built within it. Honestly, I would not differentiate how to measure success between women and men, but, and I think that in itself is a challenge to do.
Yeah.
What I do want is for society to realize that you need to expand the definition of success and expand the definition of work.
Yes.
Now, any mother that is, any housewife right now that is handling even one child, let alone 2, 3 children, like, to think that for anyone to think that that is not productive work, even from a massive quantitative economic perspective, is crazy. It's crazy, right? It is one of the hardest jobs. And if you actually calculate return on economic investment on the long term, it is also one of the most productive jobs, because you are building the SDM, or the human resource future of the next generation, right? So I think just shifting that mindset to seeing like, taking care of children for women who do choose to take care, that is work. That is hard work and productive work. And I think a lot of men don't yet see it that way. And I don't think governments see it that way yet. And I think that eventually needs to change, right? The amount of problem solving, critical thinking, emotional restraint, leadership ability, financial management you need to have to get that job right, Lou, is comparable, I would say, to some of the top even technology product leaders, etc. The level of complexity is so high in managing a household with children that I think there should be some appreciation of that. And I don't know what that means, really, in what form that appreciation should be. All I know is that there needs to be a shift in how, especially men and patriarchal societies, view the value of that work. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is that now that women are also earning, women who are in careers that are earning economically for the family as well as men, in those kind of relationships, there needs to be also a clear expectation and cultural shift that both sides of the equation need to contribute. But it's not always, it's not about being equal, etc. Some men need to focus purely on their career, and some women do not want to go their career, and that's a choice. But those choices need to be appreciated for what they are through any part of the spectrum. And I think that child rearing is the one thing that husbands and wives and partners that rear children can really get around. It's something you can find consensus around, contributing on a more even basis, right? And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I hate the all or nothing thing. Like all guys have to be equal to girls and how much husbands and fathers need to be the same amount of time with their children as mothers. It's not a competition, and it's not about all or nothing formulas. It's about closing the gap, right? It's directional that we need to change. We need to get fathers to spend more time with their children. We need fathers to take up more of the mental burden of raising children from women and from their partners, in order for the partners to have the same kind of opportunities that they have, that the husbands have as well. And I think that is a really tough thing to crack, right? But it has to change. But it is changing, Lou. The next generation is changing pretty dramatically in how they view parenthood. So I'm very optimistic.
There's an interesting question here from Yulia Hidayati. Just wondering how the MOE can simply tackle the gender stereotyping in school textbooks, since in many school textbooks, there are still examples of gender bias.
Yeah, that's not an easy problem to solve. You know, you find gender bias in not in textbooks in Indonesia. You find gender bias in textbooks everywhere in the world, right? Yes. It's you know, we can make a concerted attempt in the ministry to try to transform most of that and encourage publishers and writers. But honestly, I think the most important way is by providing choice, and as much choice for textbooks and as much range that we try to eliminate, you know, the more harmful elements of that substance by also providing other options, which is what a big part of our reform is, actually democratizing the textbook and the reading books choices, and using this with some digital technology as well, by utilizing, you know, digital books, libraries with which to then select and curate the physical books. So there's a lot of stuff there that's happening from a curriculum perspective. It's not, but don't forget, we're not just here fighting gender bias. We're here fighting radicalization, right? Yes. We're here, which is also a huge problem in textbooks and in individuals in schools. We're also fighting sexual violence, which is very much related to gender equality. And we're also fighting bullying, which is all, okay. So Lou, the kind of the big programs that we're doing, which we're releasing a series of policies right now, what we call the 3 sins. And, you know, we took a while deciding on whether we wanted to call it sin or no, but we decided that because of the severity and the spiritual depth of that word sin, it's very important to call it what it is. It's a sin. And we call it the 3 sins. The 3 sins in educational institutions, things that we have zero tolerance for, that we have a mission to eradicate. The first is intolerance. This is for intolerance, religious intolerance, ethnic or racial intolerance. It's intolerance, okay, for differences, right? The second is sexual violence. Now, sexual violence has an entire gradation that starts with sexual harassment and sexual and gender-based bullying, all the way to criminal activities. And this is called, what we call it under one group called sexual violence, right? Kekerasan seksual. And then the third sin that we have is bullying, right? Qualitatively different from the other 2, but guess what, Lou? All of these 3 things are some form or shade of intolerance and the abuse of power by the dominant majority, or the dominant component of society. And that's the point. If we just try to tackle one thing at a time, my fear is that we're actually not attacking the root cause. Why we decided to attack these 3 things, intolerance for difference, sexual violence, and bullying in the same way, is because what we are trying to do is we are trying to send signals to the system that we are here as a united society that believes in justice and equality for all. And
I totally get this. Yeah.
You cannot have a society with those values, which we have embodied in the Pancasila, which are our national values enshrined in our constitution, if you are attacking the weak person in the group, if you are imposing your will on the weak group in the person. So for us in the Ministry of Education, these 3 sins are interconnected, and you've got to eradicate all of them in order to eradicate one of them.
And in fact, what I'm hearing from you is everything you're doing in spirit is anti-patriarchal. There's no discussion to it, right? Because if you don't recognize that these 3 sins are happening, let alone address it, then it gives way to the power, to, I would say, the force or the gender that could be seen as more physically powerful or imposing, that could lead to bullying. I'm not saying only men bully, but typically, if you're physically more imposing, it does tend to more bullying, and sexual harassment tends to, or catcalling or whatever you call it, tends to, you know, come from the dominant sex in a patriarchal society. So in fact, you're already addressing it directly or indirectly. Now, based on that, I just wanted to go back to you as a father of 3 daughters, which I'm sure surprised you. What keeps you up at night when it comes to your 3 daughters? Because, you know, what generation will they be? Generation past Z, I don't know what you call it. And what worries you, when it comes to them, their future happiness, success, their journey in life, which is going to be very different from yours and Franca's and mine.
Right. If I permission to answer that question very honestly, Lou.
Sure.
I'm not, both me and Franca as parents are less worried about our daughters not being able to fulfill their aspirations, their passions, because of gender issues. I think, the way we're raising our daughters, the values that we're instilling with them, will hopefully, and we're pretty confident in this, will hopefully give them a sense of self-confidence that is equal to a man. And no matter what society tells them, they will have the independent-minded. So that's our job, me and Franca's job, to kind of pass down those values. So we're less worried about that aspect. I am worried about my daughters. One is entering this very uncertain simulation world that is social media. And this is coming from a guy who loves technology, right? I'm a technologist by training and by experience. And so, but it really concerns me, especially being the father of girls, to how does participation, which I cannot stop them forever from, getting online and joining social media accounts and interacting with, people that are out of our control, and how to protect them from, cyberbullying, how to protect them from sexual predators that are online, how to protect them from all of these issues that we've seen young girls having, body image issues, confidence issues, bullying, and all these kind of issues, which I think is a very distorted world in social media. Don't get me wrong, social media has a huge number of benefits for society and amazing opportunities that we never had before. But there are, I think, some disproportionate risks for girls, especially young girls, in social media and in this online world. So I think that's something that does worry me, because it's kind of outside of my control, right? So I think every parent I would urge parents to just put that in the back of their mind over all the things that could affect a girl's self-esteem, could affect their sense of safety, could affect their confidence, and their self-image because of social media. So that's one thing that definitely stresses me out. Sorry, did you have a comment?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think the other thing that stresses me out has nothing to do with gender. I think what stresses me out is the acceleration of climate change and the world that my daughters will live in. They will be the first generation. My eldest daughter is going to be 4 soon. So I believe they will be the first generation to fully experience the catastrophic impacts of climate change. And, the guilt and shame that I have in not being able to do, I will probably spend the rest of my life trying to do what I can, but the shame in my generation and in my parents' generation and leaving the planet in such bad shape that it's my daughter's generation that has to bear the brunt of what we did, that makes me feel really bad and really shameful. And I worry about the world that they will live in because of climate change. So I think, technology is amazing and there's so many opportunities that my daughters can pursue in the world of technology, but growing up as a child with not yet mature brains, dealing with being a citizen of this online world of social media, that scares me. Climate change also scares me. But I believe in the collective ability of me and Franca to instill a lot of self-esteem and value in our kids. So I'm not worried that they will have perspectives that are patriarchal in nature. I think they're going to be go-getters in whatever they want to do.
Yeah, let's just go a little bit back when you were a CEO and a founder. And I know a majority of this conversation is focused on education, but I'm just curious. You've seen a lot of women in the workforce. You've hired a lot of women in the workforce. You've seen them beat themselves up, berate themselves. You've seen them succeed. You've promoted them, and so on and so forth. What would your advice be to everyone working today, whether it's in my team or in your team, or the teachers that are listening in, the counselors listening in, the people who are about to enter the workforce, in not outsourcing their learning so that they can keep getting or gaining confidence? Because I find in my own experience, I gave myself this. I had to fight tooth and nail to get to a point where I don't question my worth. I don't question my value. I am blind to gender and color in any room I enter, and that my voice matters as much as the next guy. So if you could just rewind from the, that decade you spent in Gojek, what would your advice be as a former CEO to the ladies or the young girls or the women listening in as working women today, so that they can gain that kind of confidence and be unreasonable?
Yeah. I think, what I would tell young women leaders in my organization, by the way, in my previous company, we had pretty record-breaking numbers of women leaders. And I was very disappointed that it was actually at the middle level, which is great because they're really the movers and shakers in a company. But at the very top, there were not enough women. And so that has always been my complaint. Even in the ministry today, a huge amount of our new incoming team are women. My special staff team, which are the coordinators between each of the respective director generals, a lot of them are women. And so it's kind of, I've seen firsthand the impact that women can bring to the workforce and to the performance of an organization. So my advice to young women in their career is, I think the first is you gotta stand up for what you believe in. I would say the same advice to the young men that see this happen, even in a very progressive technology company like the one I founded, Gojek. The epidemic of mansplaining was still a huge issue, and I would see it. And it only exists because nobody calls it out. And maybe I should explain to people that don't know what the term mansplaining is. It's what happens in a corporate environment when a woman speaks and very few people listen. And then a man or that maybe disagrees or something will just basically condescend the woman speaking and basically deny their point and minimize it or dismiss it. It's a very dismissing male culture in working environments to women opinions, no matter if the woman is a high-level executive. This happens all the time, and I see this happening all the time. What's even worse is that there's a corollary to mansplaining, is that when a man actually says the same opinion within a specific meeting, etc., it is usually perceived much more positively and much more open to reception. Now, this happens so subtly, and the only reason it happens all the time is that nobody calls it out, is that it gets tolerated and no one speaks up. So the first thing that I would urge all young women in this new workplace to do is to speak up and complain about it. And to tell the people who are doing that respectfully and politely that it makes them feel dismissed and they should pause first and listen to what they have to say. So it's easy for me to tell young women to be confident, right? The hard part is getting the courage to do it right there on the spot. I understand that this is not easy, but it is required. And my advice, even though I'm supposed to give advice to the women, my advice for the men is that it's got to be you that is out there calling out the other men that's doing that, right?
Correct.
That's the first thing. The second thing is to do the same thing with inappropriate sexual advances and behavior in the office. because that's also another virus that just spreads through tolerance to that. And that needs to be done in also a systematic way by the corporations itself. But, you know, nothing will happen if you don't complain about it, if you don't tell someone in a position of power that this is a real problem. And so I think they all revolve around standing up, right? To not being the victim and saying what it is, the kind of change that you want to see. This is not easy. I understand. This is so easy to say it. It's so hard to do. I understand that. But nevertheless, it's got to start to happen. Otherwise, it won't move. The third part is bring in the guys. That's my advice. Bring in the guys that are progressive, that have a similar type of sense of values into your fight against these kind of bad patterns that are happening in the corporate environment. Make the men your allies instead of your enemy. And the men who are of the same kind of values, I think it's very important to bring in the men into this discussion and have them also lead a lot of these initiatives. I would say those are my pieces of advice. And, you know, when you're talking about more senior careers, you know, especially for women who have very successful careers, but also have children, you know, my advice would be is to, you know, demand that participation from your spouse, you know, and say like, look, you know, both our careers matter, and therefore I need help, and not be ashamed about it. And for the guy to not be ashamed about it, to doing that and seeing that as a fundamental task of parenthood. And I can assure you, you know, once you put your heart into it, it's a beautiful thing for men. It's one of the most beautiful and satisfying things that I could never, ever achieve in the professional world. I've had several achievements in the professional world, and nothing comes close to actually achieving milestones with your children as an educator, as a mentor, and as their father, you know. So trust me, it's worth it.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you've demonstrated the role of men, which was really my hope and the point of this discussion, not just as a Minister of Education, but as a married guy, as a father, as a husband. Now, I do have a little bit of a surprise for you, because a conversation with me does not end just like that. So last time it was Franca asking you a question unbeknownst to you. What I want to do for the next 5 minutes before we close is that we have a very unreasonable young woman. Her name is Lara Chen. She's 15 years old. Just like you, she wants to go to Harvard, if not Harvard, some other equivalent school. But what really struck me, she is Singaporean, Chinese. She's in the panelist now. We're gonna have to unmute her now, Reddit. She has something to say and something to ask. But what I find so amazing about Lara is not just her age, but her passion project, apart from being an author at a very young age, is one of gender equality. This is her thing. This is her jam. And she has a project that she wants to share with you that she would like you to comment on. And she has one specific question for you. On top of that, Lara is open enough to say she wants to be she wants to be the Prime Minister of Singapore one day. And that's great, because this is the very definition of confidence and being unreasonable. And she's 15 years old. So Lara, why don't you take us through the next 3 slides that we have prepared for Mas Nadiem. Reddit, we need the slides to be shared, if that's possible. And while waiting for the slides, maybe Lara, you can just start introducing yourself. Lara, can you hear me? Oh, she's frozen. Lara. Reddit, do you want to just drop her a message? I'm just going to try to introduce her. So her name is Lara. She's a student, an author, a rock climber, a drummer, a gamer, and a feminist. So that's great. She's also a dreamer, and one day dreams of being a Prime Minister of Singapore. And she believes that it starts in the classroom, which I thought this is something that would actually interest you, Nadiem, Mas Nadiem. And so her initiative is about the implications of gender equality for Singapore. How are we closing the gender gap? Singapore is only in the top 5 in Asia. I think it's actually number 5. Indonesia is number 9 in terms of closing that gap. How does gender equality impact her? How can she, as a teenager, foster a gender-inclusive environment? So the fact that at 15, she's already thinking about this. Lara, can you hear us now? Yeah, I don't want to talk about her project, but she can't seem to hear us. Lara?
Yes, hello.
Okay, go. Do you want to tell us about your project, Lara? Yeah.
Hi, Lara. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well. How are you?
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, all right. So, okay, let me start. So, in The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir argues that women are often complicit in reinforcing their own unfreedom. And so that got me thinking, why do we women accept our own oppression passively? Why, for thousands of years, did no one stand up and go, hey, this is a little unfair? The simple answer is that from a young age, girls are brainwashed into accepting this without question by the people that they trust the most, their parents and their teachers, even if they may not know it themselves. So how can we combat this toxic mindset? Simple, prevent it from taking hold in the first place. And so that's why I founded Fem Equality, an initiative that aims to address the root causes of gender equality by educating teenagers, both boys and girls alike, about feminism. Through various activities, they can gain a better understanding of the feminist movement and the importance of their own contribution. Of course, I know that it's highly unlikely that my seemingly insignificant actions alone can erase decades of prejudice. However, in the words of Ovid, dripping water hollows out stone, not through force, but through persistence. Indeed, I have full faith that true gender equality will definitely be achieved if we continue to persevere. It may not happen in your lifetime or in mine, but it will definitely happen one day, through the combined efforts of generations upon generations of feminists working together. That concludes my speech. Thank you for listening.
Do you have a question, Lara?
Oh,
You have a
yes,
question?
I do have a question for you. My question, as a student who formerly went to a sex-segregated school, and by that I mean girls only, and I'm now in a mixed schools with girls and boys, do you think that sex segregation in schools actually contributes to the gender gap?
Wow, that's a very good question. First of all, Lara, let me just say how impressed I am. The fact that you're a bit of a polymath with multiple talents and activities. You're like what David Epstein calls in his book Range, a super generalist that has found a kind of singular passion to tie it all together. And that's amazing. And congratulations on finding this passion, this calling to fight for gender justice. The question is a very difficult question that you ask. And honestly, I don't think there is enough data yet to say which one, at least not that I've seen, right? I think I've seen some single sex schools that are extremely progressive. I've also seen ones that maybe have much more conservative or traditional values associated with it. And I've also seen mixed sex schools that have, very patriarchal views. I think, Tara, what ultimately is the determinant are the leaders of the institution itself, is how the principal, the heads of departments, and how the teachers are actually thinking about these values. I don't think it's the specific structure of the school that actually makes it tilt one way or the other. At the end of the day, a cultural shift is determined by the collective understanding and consensus and agreement of the leaders of that organization. And in schools, they are teachers and principals. And so I think it's very specific on the individual in every school. I hope that semi answers your question, Lara.
Yeah, I do think that makes sense. Thank you for answering.
Thank you, Lara. Now, Mas Nadiem, before I end, because I was told we had until 4 and then or 3 o'clock your time, but we have 5 minutes left. Did you have a question for me?
I have many questions. I have many questions, and I think, you know, if you don't mind me asking you a personal question, what or who was the most influential kind of impact or watershed moment that made you believe in your ability to achieve anything a man could? Is it a specific moment, or is it this slow progression?
I think it's both. It started with a specific moment that became a slow progression. So, and I love this question. So the context of my answer is that I grew up in the Philippines, as a lot of people know, and in the gender gap report, Philippines is number 2 next to New Zealand. We've got more female presidents than any other country. We've got a female vice president today. There's a lot of senior leaders that are women. And so it was never a thing. That was always the context. It was not genderized what you could achieve, even if it's a very macho society. But I'll tell you what the watershed moment was. I wanted a 10% increase in my former agency. And I'm not talking about 5,000 Sing dollars, okay? I'm talking way less than that. And at that point, and I think that was 2000, maybe 10, 11, something like that. I'm giving away my age. It was just a recognition of what I've achieved. And at that point, when I was head of new business, I had won the biggest account that, you know, I had done the Super Bowl of pitching for 2 years and won everything there was to win. And there was no answer as to why they couldn't give me a 10% increase until later on, I was told by a man, well, we couldn't promote you because you had an awful breakup. And, you know,
wow.
And I said, no, what? Because the fact that I overcame it while I was crying in the bathroom in between pitches, or alone or not so alone in a boardroom, probably should have shown you I had the wherewithal to overcome all that stuff. And it wasn't an ordinary breakup. It was somebody I thought I was going to get married to. I mean, Franca knows about all of this. And so when Publicis hired me as a CEO, I even actually said, no, really, I just want to be an MD. I mean, I did a whole self-doubt thing until a female friend of mine said, you're not going to be able to knock on doors with that title. You just have to go for it. And you just have to grow into it. And there was no choice. I had to grow into it because the company was in the red. I was double-digit negative margin, and I had to turn it around in 10 months. And the rest is history, because now I've got 330 in my employ, which is the biggest in the market. I've got over 35 regional brands from 1.5, few global brands, and 14 capabilities from 0. And so that process very rapidly came from the watershed moment. And when I became the CEO 7 years ago, I thought to myself, my goodness, I have a rare opportunity. I have to make the most out of this. I don't have time to feel scared or insecure. I have to swallow all that pride, insecurity, everything, because there's so much relying on this moment that if I could show I could make it, then people who look like me or from my region or girls everywhere, or even guys from Southeast Asia, because my industry was very dominated by Caucasians when I started. And I took the responsibility that, you know, it needs to inspire rather than not inspire. And I take that responsibility very seriously every day in everything. And at one point, just like you wake up and you go, the remit is not the thing. It's just what you do. The paying it forward, such as these conversations, is what gives you the psychic income to go, well, you need to up your game when it comes to inspiring and telling people it's possible. And if it means being unreasonable in the way you do it, you got to do it.
Well, Lou, thanks a lot. I just, you know, the reason I asked is because I think that no matter, you know, how far we go with educational reform or cultural reform, political reform, you know, nothing is going to substitute the power of heroes for girls. Nothing's going to substitute that. The power of seeing women do the most unreasonable things and accomplish the most unreasonable achievements. Nothing is going to substitute that as such a powerful driving force to make girls everywhere believe. So I think you as a shining example is proof of that. And, you know, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I know that we have to stop now. I just want to thank your team. They've been exceptional, such troopers, including rehearsal or run through yesterday. I want to thank my team. And Nadiem, you know, I hope this is not lost on you, how profound it is to end 4 in a series. We've spoken to 7 people, 6 outstanding, exceptional, successful women, and we're ending with you, you know,
Am I the only male in your series?
You're the only male.
Oh my goodness, what an honor. What a privilege.
Yes, because we need to hear from the men on how they need to inspire women and change their own behavior. And in this particular case, you didn't just show us as the Minister of Education, but as a father and a husband, and as a guy that is of your generation that is trying to change the mindset with your job and your calling and your vocation. And so, you know, I hope this is not the last conversation I'm going to have with you, Nadiem. You're exceptional, outstanding example. And thank you for being the honorary feminist of this year's International Women's Week, which is the Power of Unreasonable Women.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone listening in from Indonesia, Singapore, and everywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Lou. Bye-bye, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We will immediately get underway with today's program.